Welcome to the Obstructing Injustice podcast, where you join criminal defense lawyers on our relentless pursuit of justice in defense of the accused, and learn from courtroom gladiators who fight the good fight as we discuss the real practice of criminal law. Buckle up and get ready for the show.
Welcome to the Obstructing Injustice podcast. The mission of this podcast is to further our relentless pursuit in the defense of the accused and convicted. We're going to interview criminal defense lawyers, discuss systemic issues in the criminal justice system, hopefully educate some young lawyers, and learn from other zealous advocates fighting the good fight. Our first guest of all time, our esteemed guest today, is David Benowitz. He is a partner at Price Benowitz LLP. It's a mid-sized firm in Washington, D.C. They have lawyers in D.C., Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, and even in South Carolina. And so with that, we're going to go back and kind of give you a little overview about who David is. He graduated from George Washington Law School, where he was a member of the Law Review and Moot Court Board. He also received his LLM in trial advocacy from Temple University, and he's also board certified criminal trial advocate from the National Board of Trial Advocacy. He began his career and received invaluable experience as a public defender in the nationally recognized Public Defender Services in Washington, D.C., and we're definitely going to talk to him more about that and how that was a cornerstone of his career. In his spare time, when he has very little, he's a faculty member for the Trial Advocacy Workshop at Harvard Law School, the Building Trial Skills Workshop at Georgetown University Law Center, and is a lecturer at the George Washington University Law School as well. Now, he's received numerous awards and accolades, but one recognition that stands out to me is that he's been chosen 7 times as Washington, D.C.'s best lawyer by the readers of the Washington City paper in their Best Of series. Welcome to the show, David. Glad to have you on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, being our first guest, it's quite the honor, and obviously being part of the law firm I work at, certainly I'm glad that we're able to get this podcast kicked off. I think we're going to do a lot of good things, have a lot of good interviews, and hopefully not only teach a lot of people about what criminal lawyers do, what the criminal defense justice system truly is, all its flaws, all its, blemishes there, and then hopefully learn from each other as well. That's kind of the goal, is to spread the word, right? As to all the good that criminal defense lawyers do, despite the negative public perception that's out there about our profession, be able to show why we defend people that are accused of crimes, why we do what we do, why we get up in the morning, and ultimately why we're needed in having a safe and fair system, and the slippery slope that would happen if we didn't exist. Mm-hmm. So I guess first, let's start with any good story. It starts with the origin story. What's the origin story of David Benowitz?
So the reason I got into this type of work, I was an undergrad in Philadelphia in the 80s, and I got interested in being a big brother in the Big Brother program. So I became a big brother, and my little brother I ended up staying with for, it was about 13 years that I was pretty involved in his life. And his family and he, were a little bit on the wrong side of the line in Philadelphia when it comes to, now then again, a lot of the police that we were dealing with in Philadelphia at that time were on the wrong side of the line. So there was quite a blurred line in Philadelphia in the 80s. But so eventually my little brother got arrested and ended up doing some time in prison. And that his interaction with his public defender in Philadelphia, which I thought was a very positive interaction, and the representation that he got, which I thought was very good, really spurred my interest in potentially becoming a public defender. And I then did an internship at a place called the Public Defender Service in Washington, D.C. I did this in my year between college and law school. I knew I was going to law school, but that's like most kids, from New Jersey, who were either going to be a lawyer or a doctor or something, all the Jewish kids were doing that. I didn't really know why I was going, But once I did this internship, within a couple of days when I walked in and did this internship, and basically the internship advertisement was, if you're aggressive and have a car, we'll let you investigate homicides. And I was like, okay,
show up. You're right.
Show up, and if and you're interested in fighting, that was pretty much me. So I showed up. They trained me on how to investigate homicide cases, and they cut me loose. And I was like, I am not leaving. Like I am staying in this spot for as long as I can. And I was at that office for almost 10 years. But I worked my way there through law school, and then I was an investigator for pretty much most of the year between college and law school. I worked my way through law school. Excuse me. And then I was a staff attorney at the Public Defender Service for about 7 years.
So with that, I mean, certainly that's the cornerstone of your career, right? I mean, that's where you learned how to defend people.
Yes.
That office specifically has a national recognition for quite some time. And even somebody, that was a public defender here in South Carolina and an appellate defender, I had heard of that public defender service in DC and kind of just the great work it had done. What made that office a great office? Why did they get that national recognition?
Well, for a couple of reasons. Structurally, it's protected. So in the 70s, what happened was, there was a predecessor organization, but essentially in the 1970s, the District of Columbia's local court system got created. Before that, every type of case in the District of Columbia, because it's not a state, got litigated in federal court. So if you had a trespassing case or a public, being intoxicated in public, disorderly cases, anything up to homicide got litigated in U.S. District Court, which didn't make a lot of sense. So in the 70s, they created essentially the local District of Columbia court system. So it has now the Superior Court for the District of Columbia, which handles handles all local or non-federal cases, both civil and criminal. And there's also a DC Court of Appeals, which is now the highest appellate court in the District of Columbia. That all got created. During that time period, the Public Defender Service as an organization was constituted, and it was protected funding-wise, which is a huge deal because around the country
that is the deal around the country.
Right, because around the country, for example, in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, people that I know went in and took over the public defender system, the indigent defense system in New Orleans, and everything came down to the battle over funding. There's never really been a battle over funding in the District of Columbia for the Public Defender Service. Even when in the late 90s, the federal system essentially took it over funding-wise. It's still protected. The budget is protected. So lawyers there are paid. You're not going to make the most money, but you're not starving.
It's fair.
It is fair. There might be somewhat of a discrepancy between what public defenders are paid and prosecutors, but you're on a federal pay scale at this point. When I left, I was on a federal pay scale. I wasn't quite as high as some prosecutors, but it was fair in that sense. And it was enough that I could make a career out of it if I really wanted to. So there are plenty of lawyers there who have stayed. You can stay and use your experience to help, either to help individual clients or supervise or train other people. There are people there who stayed 20 and 25 years, and they can afford to. They're not starving when they're doing that. Whereas in Philadelphia, in Boston, in Louisiana, in South Carolina, you cannot afford to be a public defender as a career unless you want to starve. It's not possible.
It makes it incredibly difficult. I mean, that's just the bread and butter of it is unless you're the director or the chief public defender, they generally will get compensated somewhat comparable to the prosecution, but that's virtually it. Every other assistant public defender, when you add in the student loans, it makes it almost impossible.
Right. So if you want to get in and fight and be a line attorney, which is what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a supervisor. That didn't make any sense to me. I didn't get into this. I didn't get into it to be a supervisor. I got into it to be there and fight. So, I was able to, during the time that I was there, I wasn't, again, it wasn't, I gave up a big law firm job to do it. So there, it probably cost me over the lifetime of my work as a public defender, dollar wise, it probably cost me, I don't know, 600 grand to do it, but I would never trade that. One, because it's what I wanted to do, and I felt like I was making a difference. Two, because I got so much experience that I made back that money many times over the rest of my career, because I was actually able to do something, as opposed to being at a big firm where, the question is, oh, have you gotten experience? Have you defended a deposition? Have you gone to court? I've done many jury trials.
Yeah,
I've represented many people.
In the same vein, I remember maybe 3 years out, I saw somebody had posted, "Oh, I got to do my first deposition." And I was like, at that point, I had argued at the South Carolina Supreme Court numerous times,
Exactly.
tried a murder case. It's like,
right.
Wow, you got to question
Exactly.
somebody in a conference room. So it's invaluable experience.
Right, and also the training that we got at the Public Defender Service, well, you would not get that training anywhere else in the country, or there may be one other place in the country. And they would also send you, if we needed additional training. I went to the National Criminal Defense College in Macon. They paid for me to go for 2 weeks. I had a case that involved DNA. This was only a few years after the O.J. Simpson case. So the Public Defender Service paid one of the experts from the O.J. Simpson case, who was behind the scenes and had trained and had worked with some of the lawyers in that case, to fly. He would fly to D.C. every month or every other month, and we would spend 2 days together, and he would train me. And this was because I had a case that involved DNA. So I had the resources, I had the training. I was one of the few people there who didn't go to Harvard, Yale, or Stanford law school. I had to fight tooth and nail to get in there, because the standard of practice is very, very high. And also the culture there. When I got there, I fully expected to work 16, 18 hours a day. And I loved it. I could not believe they were actually paying me to do what I would do for free. I walked around with my friend one day and I said, I was like, do they know that they're paying us? Like they don't realize that we just volunteer.
Right. You were all in because it wasn't work.
No, we were there. I was there with my friends on Saturday night at midnight talking about cases. That's what I loved it. And I would have loved to have stayed beyond the time I was there, but my body broke down. I just couldn't.
It's
grueling.
Couldn't sustain that. It's grueling. It's hard for someone who has never been a public defender to understand how taxing it is if you do it right, if you're truly a zealous advocate over time, what it does to your body, your mental health, and everything else.
Exactly. I had a friend who, at the time when I started at the Public Defender Service, she was with the UN High Commissioner on Refugees, and she was in Rwanda right after the genocide. And we would have these conversations, and obviously the scale of what she was dealing with was unimaginable, but the emotional toll and the physical toll was not that far different as to what I was dealing with. It was kind of, we would remark to each other that, this is not, it was surprising how similar the feelings were.
Like I said, it's indescribable, and if you're making that connection with your clients on a personal level, if you're really going to bat for them, and you have essentially a system that's set up to steamroll everybody involved, and everything is kind of against you, it's always the uphill battle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Also, what I think some people don't understand is that you're not only representing adults, you're representing juveniles. So I was 26, 27, representing 17, 16, 17, 8-year-olds. Now, sometimes I represented kids who were 10 years old. And it was just, it was not something that you can prepare for in any way. It is not possible to prepare yourself emotionally.
And it's like you said, it's impossible to prepare somebody for, because I've represented, juveniles as well, and to have, young children come in chained, and especially once you make that connection with the client, the outcome you want. And in some cases it's impossible. That just ultimately takes a toll on you.
Right. In my first solo jury trial, I was doing my closing argument, and it was interesting because I was saying the words, I was doing the closing argument, and in the back of my head there was a little voice saying, "Isn't this awesome that you get to do this? How amazing that you get up in front of these people and try and convince them of of that
your position.
that there's reasonable doubt, and that and then afterwards I started thinking, well, we could lose."
Right. That it's easy for me to be excited, like, oh wow, what a great honor I get to do and come up here. Oh wait, there's a guy who if I'm not successful, he goes to prison.
Right. I mean, and it was interesting because that was always in the forefront of my mind. It just went to the back when I was performing, when I was in court.
It is a performance in a way.
It has to be in the back of my mind because otherwise it'll paralyze you.
Right. It's too much.
Right. I mean, you have to be so careful with your decision making, and that's one of the many benefits of being at the public defender service. You have the time and the resources to help your clients make good decisions. Whereas in other places where you have a crushing caseload and you can't devote the time, one, you may be advising clients in a way that might not be the best if you knew everything about their case, because you can't possibly know. Two, you don't have the time to forge that relationship with your client to where they're more likely to trust you. So either they're listening to you without fully buying into what you're saying, even if it ultimately is the right thing to do. It's just very difficult. It's a very difficult set of circumstances. I was very lucky to be able to work at a place like the public defender service.
Right. You were in a unique circumstance where not only did they have funding, but they had resources and training. Many public defenders around the country have none of those things. So they get thrown in, to the deep end, and they don't have any resources or proper training. And, it's one of those things where I've said people, doctors in some respect, when they're training for the first time, they're working on cadavers. Young public defenders without these resources are literally kind of putting people in life-changing circumstances while they're learning on the job. I mean, it's really a crazy circumstance.
Right. And that was, I felt that pretty acutely when I first started, and I had a supervisor who was helping me, would mentor me on my cases. And I would go to her and I would say, look, I don't feel like I haven't developed the instincts to say to a client, okay, this is what you should do. I need help to develop that. This is my 5th case, 10th case, 20th case. How am I supposed to know what the best thing is looking at the whole situation? I need help with that. And unfortunately, you have to gain that experience working with real clients. Now, there you have a lot of supervision, so that's helpful. The other great thing is that our caseloads were pretty low, which is the opposite of the opposite of the model everywhere else. Whereas in the District of Columbia, the Public Defender Service attorneys take the 20% of the most violent cases. Violent crimes, sex crimes, felonies. You're not normally taking misdemeanor cases. You'll take pretty much anything as for juvenile cases when you're in that rotation. But 80% of the cases go to court-appointed lawyers that are not public defenders. So you're working with the most serious cases, you're getting the best training, and you've got the resources and the salary to help you get experience and to stay in the job. So it really is a great situation.
It's incredible. So I guess now let's transition. All right. So you've hit your 10 years, that decade of experience is now put in place. Now you're going to transition into private practice. And I guess, we can kind of go all the way up into the point where you've reconnected with your friend, your former classmate, Seth Price. You're going to hang a shingle. You're going to start a firm, co-found Price Benowitz. Could you talk about that transition?
Sure. When I stopped practicing, I needed a break. So I took about a little over a year off and slept and, tried to actually
live life
a little bit. Seth and I we had started another business together. So we talked, and I pretty quickly realized that I was not done being a criminal defense lawyer. That I just needed a little time, to recharge and, not get a migraine every day. It was nice to have that.
Right.
And also just to figure out, okay, how can I do this for another 25 years without destroying my body and becoming, an emotional, having this huge emotional toll on me. And that took a little time to figure out. And part of it is just experience. Part of it is being a little bit older. and just kind of figuring out a better way emotionally to do things. I mean, I think that's the big issue when you're a public defender. If you're doing it right, it's supposed to hurt.
Right.
It's funny. There was I was on the hiring committee when I was a public defender, and the can we stop for a sec? There's someone knocking at my door.
Yes, I'll pause. All right, we're back. So as we talked about life, right? About life and law and everything in between, sometimes it doesn't go well together. And you were talking about how that experience of getting older and having everything, trying to figure out kind of what the key ingredients was there to make this the long-lasting career that you're doing now, finding that balance.
Right. So I realized, and when I was on the hiring committee when I was a public defender, and we used to ask the applicants used to ask questions at the end of the interview, and one of them said, "Well, what quality do you think you need to be a public defender?" And I said, "You really have to enjoy getting hit in the face repeatedly and getting your nose broken every day. Like that has to become enjoyable for you, right?" And so part of the issue is if you want to do this, if you want to be a criminal defense lawyer as a career, when you're talking over 35, 40 years, you have to be able to compartmentalize that to a certain extent. As a public defender, when I was in my mid-20s, and I was a public defender, so I was 32. I knew, and frankly didn't care, that it was taking a physical toll and an emotional toll. Like it just didn't matter to me because I was in my 20s, and that was fine. If I wasn't a public defender, I'm sure I would have found another way in my 20s to have something take a physical toll, right? Right. That's what you do when you're in your 20s. It's fine.
Right.
But as a sustainable career and way to live, and now I'm married with 2 kids, you can't live that way.
No.
You can, what I have found is, as I've gotten older and more mature and more experienced, is you can still be very, very, very good at what you do. You can be an excellent lawyer and have those boundaries that allow you to, frankly, I think I'm better now, 1, because I have more experience, and 2, because I have a little bit more separation, and part of the reason is because I'm older. And maybe a little more mature, but I have a little more separation. So it enables me to take a half a step back so I can have empathy, but I am not so connected in the sense that there's no boundary between my client and myself.
Right.
And when I was a public defender, I didn't want that boundary. And that's fine. But what I found, at least for me, is that I wouldn't have been able to do the job longer than I did it, maybe for 7, 8 years that way. It just wouldn't work. Whereas now I feel like I have a much better balance, and I can have great relationships with my clients without taking on as my own their emotions, which I think is actually counterproductive to being an advisor and being a lawyer.
I agree. I think because I've seen some great lawyers who are zealous advocates not be able to find that fine line, and when they cross over into the emotional part of it, that it blurs their decision making, their ability to properly negotiate and help, like you said, advise the client in certain cases. I've just seen lawyers push certain people in different directions than they probably would have otherwise not, had they not blurred that line too far.
Yeah, I mean, I think also part of it is now that, when you're talking about doing jury trials, and I've had discussions with other people who have the similar experience as me, at a certain point, I've run into, prosecutors who are either at the start of their career or they haven't had as much experience. And it's just, for me, it's much easier to advise clients now because, I've got probably over 60 jury trials that I can fall back on. And I don't know how many cases that I've worked on and advised people on and analyzed, et cetera. So there's very few things that I haven't seen. So it's a lot easier for me to go back and think, okay, how am I going to handle this?
Right.
So you have this, not that, and I'm trying not to be overconfident. In fact, I feel like I mean, again, it enables me to see down the road. So I can say to someone, look, I can see about 5 steps down the road where this is going. And you may not believe me right now, but I see where this is going. I see the big train coming down the track. Now, if it gets too close, I'm going to tell you. Right now, it's a little bit in the distance.
Right.
But I've seen the train before. And I'm also able to identify, okay, here are the possible trains that are coming. You know, and it's just a lot easier. And because I've had the experience, I'm emotionally, I'm able to be a little bit more, have a little bit more of a compartmentalization. And that way I can be empathetic, I can be extremely involved, but I can also say, look, I've seen this before.
Right. Your advice is better. I mean, you just
right.
are
And
able to properly advise.
We need to handle this calmly. I know you're excited. I'm not as excited because I've seen it. And it's not going to serve you for me to share your emotions about it, because I'm the one that's got to go in there and destroy the prosecutor's case. So I'm going to do that in a calm, frankly, very nice and friendly way. I'm going to go in and be the friendly executioner,
right,
of the prosecutor's case. You know, that's fine. I mean, I'm very nice. You know, I try and be as nice and as friendly as possible when I'm dealing with everybody. Right? One, because these are very stressful situations.
Of course.
So there's no need to make it more stressful by having animosity personally. And two, no one likes, if I'm clearly beating up on someone, I want to do it nicely, because I don't want it to, you know, I don't want anyone on a jury to not like me.
And I think that's I'm glad you brought that up when we're talking about trial advocacy. I think that's a common misconception, that, you know, they want the biggest bulldog in the courtroom to come in and, you know, bull in a china shop and just start wrecking everybody. I think it's easy for a young lawyer to think that that's the best way to come at a trial. And then you quickly learn that a jury will turn on you fast when you beat up on the easy witness.
Yeah, I think, and also your barometer and my barometer of what is an appropriate time to go after someone in a nasty way. There's almost never a right time to do that in a courtroom. I think, one, because you can accomplish your goal in a way that doesn't require that. And two, you know, you're the one with the experience in the courtroom. That's going to show. You know, you're not nervous in the courtroom. Juries can pick up on that. When they see that you're calmly, you know, if you're being nasty about it and it's clear you know what you're doing, you know, that just looks vindictive.
Right.
To
cruel.
many people.
You're cruel.
Whereas I can, you know, whereas I can get where I need to go in a very nice and friendly way, in a way that doesn't alienate the jury, and sometimes doesn't even alienate the witness. And that energy, I mean, a lot of as I've gotten more experience, I'm much more attuned to the energy in the courtroom, because I think juries pick up on that. And, you know, and I think about it akin to a song. Like, there are songs that I like, and I don't know the words.
Right.
You know, right? You don't know the words to the song. You may never know the words to the song, but you know if you like it or not. Juries, when they hear testimony in court, they're only going to hear it once. They're not going to hear it again. You've heard this stuff many times. You've read transcripts, etc. You know your case. The jury's going to hear it once. When they hear it, it's a song, and either they're going to like it or not like it. Right. And that's not necessarily based on the words that are spoken. It's some of it, and some of it's just the energy.
And they're not going to remember all of it either.
Positive energy on your side in order to make it work.
That's right. Yeah, when I was at the National Criminal Defense College, that was we were doing the mock cross, and that was the thing. They said, you know, I was young public defender. You got to calm down. You need to be even flow, you know, as far as the pace. And it's so easy as a young lawyer to come in there and feel like you got to beat up on everybody, and that's just it's counterintuitive, but it's actually the best advice. One of the things we could give to young lawyers. I guess now that we talk about that, what's some of the advice you would give to young lawyers that are out there who are listening to the podcast? You know, you've had like you said, you've dealt with just about every issue. You've had the crucible of trial and kind of every type of criminal offense out there. So what's some of the advice you'd give to young lawyers that are listening?
I think that even now, I mean, I've been doing this for 25 years, or almost 25 years. I am so hyper prepared, and that never goes away. I mean, for example, I still write out my questions for cross-examination. Now, I write them out not because I'm going to read them. I write them out because it gets in my brain. And then when I go to cross-examine someone, I can get into my, I have my topics, I have my chapters of areas that I want to get into. I'll get into those areas. I may not look at my questions for an hour. And then I'll go back and I'll like, oh, okay, let me see where I'm at. Let me see where I am. And I'll check off all the topics I've hit. And I'll realize, oh, I didn't hit this topic, and I'll go back and do that. Also, it frees me up to listen to what the witness is saying. And I think that is one of the main things that I would say to young lawyers, which is you have to listen. You can't just go into a courtroom and expect it to be this sort of a formula. You're missing, if you do that, you're missing 50% of what's going on. And that's what makes it so interesting, because the reason we have trials, sort of the reason they play games in the NFL, right? You can have the odds, but once you start playing the game, it doesn't really matter. That's why they play them. And that's why when you're in a trial and you have human beings up there testifying, there's no given outcome, except in rare occasions. You've got DNA and fingerprints and recorded phone calls, etc. Like that's a different story. But if
I've been there,
of course, everybody's been there, right? But if you're in a trial with contested issues, you got to be listening to what's happening. The other thing I would say is you've got to immerse yourself as a young lawyer. It took me I'd say about 3 years before I could walk into a courtroom and be in a contested hearing and listen to the witness testify, listen to be ready to object, understand what the prosecutor's theory was, take a question from my client mid-testimony who starts whispering in my ear, and be ready. And as the testimony is coming and there's something instinctively I don't like, I up and I'm objecting without even thinking about it. That took about 3 years to take all that stimulus and have it flow into my head and me be able to make decisions in microseconds. But that's 3 years of immersion. That's 3 years of 18-hour days before I got that ability.
Before the light bulb finally went off.
Right. I mean, it was gradual. I mean, it wasn't, I mean, I was getting better and better
Sure.
at it. But the way you do it is by preparation and immersion. You can't do this part-time. My feeling is, cannot do it part-time. And I say to a lot of young lawyers when they're coming out and they say, well, I want to be a criminal defense lawyer. I'll say, okay, here are the places that you should go and be a public defender, because you'll immerse yourself in it. You'll be doing great work. You'll learn. And then if you want to come out and work privately, that's great. Or you want to stay and be a public defender, that's great. But don't think that you can. It's almost like if you want to be a surgeon without being a resident.
Right. It's just, there's no
doesn't
way
work
at all.
No, you can't walk in and ever be, I mean, it's impossible to do it that way. I've found. I just don't think, I think you have to have a way to immerse yourself.
And it doesn't matter how brilliant you are, how naturally gifted you are. There's no other way.
No, and when we talk about natural gifts, I mean, there are certain people who have presence, sort of natural presence or great voice, or, sort of the ability to perform on their feet. But my opinion is, after doing this, that a lot of that can be learned. And you may not have, I've seen great lawyers who, of all shapes and sizes and registers with their voice, little guys, little women, tall women, men, it doesn't matter, man or woman. And people who, I've seen great lawyers who don't have that presence, but they have different skill sets that make them equally as effective. But you have to know what you've got. And you also have to, I mean, to me, that's why preparation and experience are what make you into a great lawyer. You might be born with some skills, but you're not going to get there. And, sometimes clients will expect that, and this goes back to your point before, like they're expecting sort of fire and brimstone.
Right.
There are some lawyers who'll give you fire and brimstone. That's great. But if it's fire and brimstone without anything behind it, it doesn't really matter. And I'll tell clients, look, I can get up and yell and scream with the best of them, but unless I'm yelling and screaming about something, what am I doing? You
Right.
tell me, and then we'll go through the actual issues in a case, and figure out what I'm going to be yelling and screaming about, or what I'm going to be dealing calmly about, depending on the situation. And that's what comes, again, it comes back to preparation and knowing what you've got and how to use it. I mean, I think
Exactly.
that's the key. I mean, for me, what I have found is the more prepared I am and the more focused I am on what my theory is. In other words, you can't, in my mind, like just as a very basic example, in a homicide case, you're either usually, let's choose between these two: self-defense versus misidentification. Not me versus I did it, but the guy was going to kill me.
Some other dude did it. Defense.
Exactly. If you don't know what your theory is,
That's a problem.
What are you yelling and screaming about?
Right.
What questions are you asking? Because you're going to ask complete diametrically opposed questions to witnesses, depending on what your theory is. And you got to know what that is, and you got to be prepared. You have to have your case investigated. That's going to take you a long way in cases. And when I first started doing solo jury trials, I was relying on the preparation. There's things now that I can do a little bit more on the fly, and I do them better on the fly because I've just had the experience. But it doesn't mean I wouldn't write. That's only because I have to do them on the fly. If I could be more prepared, I always want to be more prepared.
Of course.
But that's how I got through those early trials, and how I got the experience was by hyper preparing, and I found that it worked for me. The idea that you can, and I wouldn't say it's shortcuts, but the idea that the performance can mask mask the lack of preparation, or mask the flaws in a case.
Right. The consistent
theme.
Not going to work. Right.
Not going to work. Particularly in serious felony cases.
The jury's not going to buy it. It doesn't matter what, magic trick they're going to walk up there and try to pull. It's just the credibility is gone.
Right. And also, you can't, what I have found is that your personality, being genuine can take you to a certain place. But that is not, I've never had a juror say to me, well, we thought you should have lost, but we really like you. So I've had the opposite, which is, look, we thought you did a great job, but look, your case wasn't there. Right. That's that I've had that happen far more often than.
That's more often, right?
Yeah. I mean, no one's ever said, well, we cut your guy loose because we like you.
And I think it's more the opposite. I think they can convict your client if they don't like you, more likely than not. True. It's kind of I think you can have the opposite, where your attitude in the courtroom can put the jury off in such a way that they don't listen to your theme.
Right.
That you
I mean, also a lot of right. And when you have a bad case, also they may not like you because of your case.
Sure.
The facts may be terrible. And I had that when I was a public defender. I've had that, even after that. And that you have to live with. So you may not be, you may be the least liked person in the courtroom anyway, because you're representing someone in a case where the facts are terrible. That just comes with the job.
Right. But you have to use the trial to try to build that trust between them.
Sure.
throughout the trial.
Right. So, exactly.
So with that, I guess, what mistakes would you tell them to avoid? Not just advice, but what are some pitfalls? What are mistakes you made, lessons learned? If you had to go back and say, the 20 years ago and find young Dave, the public defender, and say, hey, don't make these mistakes.
I think for me, the trap I fell into was thinking that if I won a case, that meant I was a good lawyer. And if I lost a case, that meant not only was I a bad lawyer, but I was a bad person. And that's because I was 26 years old. That's just, and I was super, and I'm still super intense. But that was because I didn't understand that is, one, not a way to be. You can't have a career.
Intense highs, intense lows. I mean, you just
you're going to have intense highs and right. You're going to have intense highs and intense lows anyway, but you can't base your self-worth on your one loss record. Because particularly as a public defender,
Oh God, no.
that will not serve you well.
No,
And also just going through life, it will not serve you well.
in anything.
No, right. To me, what I found was you have to look at your preparation, and you also have to look at your performance. I mean, I've won cases. I've won cases that I frankly probably should have lost.
Right.
And I've lost cases that I mean, probably fewer, but I've lost cases that I should have won. And that's going to happen. But what I've realized is, and what I've done, I think, a lot better as I've gotten older, is done a much more critical self-analysis of my performance and said, okay, what can I do better?
Right.
How can I prepare this better? Did I handle this issue the best way possible? Or should have done this differently or that differently? What can I do differently? Not, oh, you lost, therefore you're terrible, or you won and therefore you're great. And and frankly, because of, I think maybe it's my personality or just criminal defense lawyers' personalities, I never really remember the ones I won. I just remember the ones I lost.
The beatings. Those are the ones that stick.
Right. And that's also, to me, what gets me up in the morning. I mean, when I'm at 2 a.m. when I'm working on a case, it's like, because I don't want to be the guy who loses. And if I lose, I don't want it because I'm not prepared. I always want to be the hardest working person there. But again, if you let it determine your worth as a person, you're in trouble. So that's one thing I would say. And look, these are emotionally charged situations that most people, when you become a lawyer, you're not prepared for.
Yeah, they don't teach that in law school.
No, they can't. I mean,
it's impossible.
It'd be great if they could.
Right.
But, to put yourself in that situation where you're walking into a jail to talk to someone and you feel like their liberty depends on you and what you do, right, and what you say, that is an awesome responsibility. And I love it. I still love it. And I still feel honored to do it. But I feel like I do it better now. And I feel I do it from a more emotionally stable platform. That's what I've encouraged people to do. I think it's hard when you're young to do it and inexperienced. But I think that's probably the biggest cautionary tale that I would relate.
Yeah, I've always said that, the timing of what I'm about to say sounds terrible, but I've always said that criminal defense, if you're around the right people, the right mentors, it's infectious in the sense that once you got bit by the bug, timing's bad to say that, but yeah, once you get bit, like, you can't stop, and I've heard another lawyer that I just love. He says it's like witnessing a car crash and you have to go in and help. You have to be a first responder, so to speak. Like, you just can't turn your back to it. And then once you're involved, it's just there's no other option. Doesn't matter.
Exactly. I think it attracts and keeps a certain personality type involved. Like the people at our firm, like when we get together, the criminal defense people get together. It's what you're going to talk about. The sense of humor is pretty similar. Everyone's pretty right. Dark. Everyone's pretty intense.
Right.
And I like that. I mean, it's
fun.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's definitely
not for everybody.
Not for everybody, but I feel like I've had such a great experience with it. Like, I feel so lucky because there's so many people that I went to law school with who, they don't practice law anymore.
Or they're miserable, just completely miserable.
Or they're totally miserable. And I worked at a big firm for a summer in between my second and third year. Mm. And, I needed the money, so I did it.
Of course.
And I had no illusions about it. But even having no illusions about it, I was astounded at the level of misery. There was not one happy person there. I mean, the equity partners hated it. And I was like, these were the guys making millions of dollars a year. They're like, don't come here. Right. And I was like, okay, well, right, if you're holding a dinner at your house and you're telling me not to come here, that's a pretty strong message. And and I have I've been exhausted and mentally stressed, but I've never been unhappy doing this job. It's always been a pleasure and an honor to do it. And so I feel extremely lucky.
So I guess before we kind of start to getting towards the last little bit of our interview here, I know you've had some notable cases. You've had an Innocence Project case, and then you've had one recently, a post-conviction case that you've had for many, many years. And ultimately, this newly discovered evidence, this after discovered evidence is found and able to be a part of one full exoneration, the other one, the nature of the beast through an offered plea. If you could tell everybody about those, because I know those are two cases that had their own publicity, their own worth, and those are the cases that we live for.
Sure. I mean, well, I began working with the Innocence Project. This is about 8 years ago, and we were working on this one case, which, for those who know about the Innocence Project, they do a lot of DNA cases. You know, a lot of cases where they find evidence that hadn't been tested or been tested incorrectly, and they get it retested, and that helps to exonerate people. There've been some very famous Innocence Project cases that involve exonerations. This case was offered to me because they said the people offered to me said, "Look, you have a lot of experience. You'd be great for this case, but there's no DNA. We got to go out, and we think this guy's innocent, but we got to go out and figure out how we got to be creative with this." And it was very interesting. And our client was such a lovely guy, and is such a lovely guy. It took us about 6 years to get it to the point where we were able to get the prosecutors in the post-conviction unit in Baltimore City to reinvestigate it. They opened a grand jury investigation, and then they took what we found and they expanded upon that, and they found about 20 other witnesses who were able to show that our guy it was a murder case, didn't do it. He was serving life without parole. So he got out. Now it's 2.5 years ago, and he's doing great. So,
well, I got to spend like over an hour with him stuck in a
I know
ride share.
exactly. You got to meet
And so
him, yeah.
we got to know each other. We were stuck in traffic in a ride share for like over an hour and a half, sitting right beside him. So it was just an amazing experience to kind of, he asked me a lot, because I was fortunate as a young lawyer coming out and having my own type of exoneration case through after discovered evidence. So he and I talked about that for the whole hour and a half, and it was just an absolute pleasure.
Oh, it's great. It's great. And now with our more recent case, this is a case I've worked on for half my career. And it's just so interesting because we had you really can divide it up into about 4 lines of attack. Plan A didn't work. Plan B didn't work. Plan C didn't work. Plan D, we hit the jackpot. And it was just incredible about how that worked out. And as it turns out, it was finally disclosed that sitting in the detective's homicide case jacket was a note that had not been disclosed for 23 and a half years that named very specifically a second suspect, with name, date of birth, social security number, etc. Never been investigated, never disclosed. And we were able to use that. We were in the middle of some post-conviction hearings, and this added a lot of energy to that. We filed emergency motions, and that led us down this whole new path. We had a whole other set of hearings on it, and we were finally able to resolve this with the government, where we did a resentencing because our client had been found guilty at trial, so he never had pled guilty. We did a resentencing to essentially time served.
Oh, okay. I thought y'all.
He walked out the door, and he's on 2 years of probation. But we expect that he'll be getting his associate's degree this summer, depending on what happens with his course load because of the virus. But hopefully, in the next few months, he'll have his associate's degree and then move on to his bachelor's degree. And during that time, we expect his probation will be terminated successfully.
Nice.
So he's doing great now, and it's fabulous. It's really fabulous.
Yeah, there's no greater feeling, either you getting those 2 sweet words of not guilty, or obviously the exoneration's a whole nother,
absolutely,
whole nother aspect.
Yeah.
All right, so we got this part towards the end of we have 2 things we like to wrap up with. One called the cross-examination, and then we'll get into war stories to close. So for cross-examination, I got 5 real quick, right off the bat questions.
Okay.
So what's your favorite law-related movie?
Presumed Innocent.
Ah, good one. How about favorite law-related book?
Oh, what's that book? There's I can't remember the name. It's a Jerry Spence book that I really like. And also, I really like is the Jeffrey Toobin book, the O.J. Simpson Run of His Life. That's
I've heard it's great.
Are we talking about nonfiction? If we're talking nonfiction,
doesn't matter. Either
if we're talking fiction, Oh, I mean, there's any George Pelicano's book. There's the Dennis Lehane books. There's the Michael Connolly books, which I really like. The Lincoln Lawyer books, those are really good. So, I mean, I read a couple of books a week anyway, so I've got a whole host of fiction books that I'll read.
Nice.
Fictional series.
Which lawyer in history would you want to meet if you could? If you could make that table sit down happen, which lawyer in history would you want to meet? And why?
Which lawyer would I want to meet?
There's so many good ones.
I know. I would say I'll give you two. John Adams, because he defended the Hessians. I think it was Bunker Hill. I think it was at Bunker Hill, I think at Bunker Hill he defended them.
I don't want to go wrong, but I do know he defended them. I don't want to.
He defended the Hessians and ran around the Revolutionary War, and then I think Edward Bennett Williams.
Nice.
Yeah, just because he was so connected.
Yeah, the John Adams it'd be amazing.
Right.
So, list one thing that has made you a better lawyer. Just right off the top of your head, what's one thing that you do that's made you a better lawyer?
You mean one practice?
Yeah, what's one thing you do? It doesn't have to be daily, weekly. Just one thing you do. Some people, exercise is their thing. I know that's a new big thing of yours. Is really exercising. Yeah, it could be anything, or it could be reading a book. You read books every week.
I think I do a fair amount of martial arts, and that has calmed me down, like really calmed me down. So in a way that it makes me, it's enabled me to assess more when things are coming at me. I'm like a hair calmer, and it's because I usually get this adrenaline rush like most people do, and I still get it, but I'm able to manage it a little bit better. And I find that I can look at that and say, oh, okay, I should go forward here, or I take a step back and then go forward. So it's given me an extra second to evaluate things, which I find interesting.
Nice. So last, what would you do if you were not a lawyer? What job, what's your dream job minus being a lawyer? What would be the other thing?
All right. There's a couple. I would say originally, but they don't really have the league anymore, pro beach volleyball player. But I'd have to be 6'6", right. And I'm not 6'6". It's not really a long career. I wouldn't mind being an MMA fighter. That's similar to being a public defender, but let's say MMA fighter.
Pays better.
Yeah. Or I'd like to be the guy who manages the salary cap for an NFL team.
Interesting. That's a good one.
That's why I'd like to be a capologist. Yeah, I'd like that.
That's a good one. All right. Yeah. So to end the show, war story. It can be most memorable, funny, comedic, however your choice. War story. The floor is yours.
Okay. So I had a case where my client was accused. This is different than the one I told you yesterday. I had a case where my client was accused of robbing his own father at gunpoint. This was back in the 90s, a lot of, in DC, the crack, crack was so prominent, and there was a lot of stuff going on. Excuse me. And our defense at trial was misidentification, and we won. I got the case dismissed after openings. So what happened was, I went out to investigate the case, and we went out to talk to the father. And he was, late 60s, early 70s, walking around. And I said to him, I had a hunch. We're talking about, he said, look, my son came up behind me and he pointed a gun at me and I knew it was him, etc. I said, okay. I said, fine. Would you mind, no offense, could we do a little eye test? Just a little eye test. And I'm less than 3 feet away from, normal conversational distance, a couple of feet. Brightly lit hallway. I put my finger, I said, how many fingers do I have up? He goes, 4.
You did the My Cousin Vinny? You actually had the My Cousin Vinny defense and it worked?
He had double cataracts.
Oh my God.
And that had not been operated on. Double cataracts. Then the whole case unraveled from there. It turns out that this guy had been living with, he was, let's say 70, he was living with a 20-year-old crackhead woman who hated the son because the son did not want her there because she was a crackhead and was stealing the guy's money. She put him up to saying that he robbed her to get him out of the picture. So he recanted to me. So I had the double cataracts and the recantation. The prosecutor comes in. This was my first solo jury trial. This one got dismissed right after openings. So prosecutor comes in before the trial. He had just got back from vacation. He was all tan from he had been in the islands. And obviously you talk about preparation. Like I had this thing locked.
Right.
And he said, look, I really like you. You're a nice kid. I'm not going to hurt you too bad in this trial.
Real patronizing.
Yeah, he's like, I know, but not even, no, he was really nice. He's actually being nice.
Yeah. Okay.
But he's like, I've done 100 jury trials, and it's like my 100th or 101st, but don't worry. It's going to be fine.
It'd be smooth.
I said, great, okay. So he gets up, he does his opening, he goes, listen, Mr. Benowitz he's a nice lawyer. This is in his opening. He's a nice lawyer. You know, it's not about him, it's his case. You know. And I get up and I said, well, this guy had cataracts and can't see anything, and he recanted, and I have the statement right here, and I pull out a blow-up of the statement saying where he said he didn't do it, and it was all a lie. So we start, after openings, the prosecutor comes and goes, is that true? I said, yeah. He goes, all right, give me 2 minutes. And he walks out, he comes back, he's like, I'm dismissing. So that was
That's an epic first case, a first jury trial.
Yeah, it was great. Great.
That's perfect.
That was a memorable one.
Yes. Well, you can't beat it. Not only is it your first jury trial, which is barely a trial. I mean, outside of the opening.
Exactly.
But I guess that goes right back to what you said earlier about rolling back your sleeves, doing your own independent investigation, going to the scene and interviewing witnesses. I mean, that was the perfect antidote.
Oh yeah. I mean, and that's the thing where, we were always taught you prep. If you have a defense witness, you prepare them 3 times, 3 sessions. And we had one guy who I was literally asking 3 questions to, and I was dragging lawyers out with me. I was like, we got to go out and prepare them. And they're like, okay, we go out there. I ask them 3 questions. They're like, you dragged me out 45 minutes for 3 questions. I was like, we're doing it 3 times. But yeah, that's the thing. You got to be over prepared.
Perfect. Well, again, thank you so much for being on our first episode. Hopefully
everything. Great. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. We'll hopefully get it out soon, get everything up and running. The big thing is, just again, thank you. We'll start getting everybody in line and start knocking out all these interviews. But I think this is a outstanding first episode. So thank you.
No, great. This is awesome, man.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, again, thank you for anyone who's listening, watching. We'll put this on YouTube. We'll have all our social media set up here soon. So make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all that other nice stuff. Again, lawyers and disclaimers, right? So none of this is legal advice. This is just general information that's been provided here. We're not your lawyer, but if you have a case, call us. We'll be happy to sit down and talk to you. So we got our legal disclaimers out of the way, but thanks everybody so much, and everybody take care. Check us out next time.